Back at the end of August, when Mark Zuckerberg appeared on Joe Rogan's show and made news by saying that the FBI all but directed Facebook to suppress the Hunter Biden laptop story before the 2020 election, Zuck made it sound like this was simply an instructional relationship. The FBI told us what to do, and we respect law enforcement, so we did it.
The FBI, I think, basically came to us, some folks on our team, and was like, hey, we thought that there was a lot of Russian propaganda in the 2016 election. We have it on notice that basically there's about to be some kind of dump that's similar to that, so just be vigilant. If the FBI, which I still view as a legitimate institution in this country, it's a very professional law enforcement, they come to us and tell us that we need to be on guard about something, then I want to take that seriously.
Now, as more information is coming in, it's looking like that relationship was a lot more reciprocal than Zuck described. Not just the FBI bringing information to Facebook, but Facebook returning the favor and happily bringing information to the FBI too, unprompted. Not even information that the FBI specifically requested, but information that Facebook voluntarily scouted themselves, all very professionally, just like the FBI itself, of course. But before we get to those specifics, I don't want to rely on just the accusations alone, because that's the easy way to dismiss this story. It's just a series of accusations without any substantiating evidence. But the circumstances for exactly the sort of spying that Facebook is now being accused of are perfectly present. In fact, they have been for years. So you don't have to believe this story on its face. You can just put together the pieces that already exist. Facebook works closely with the FBI for whatever the FBI's goals may be. Mark Zuckerberg confirmed that not just with his words, but with his actions of actually doing their censorship bidding. We also know from reports dating back years that Facebook uses both automated tools and an army of moderators to monitor even private messages on the platform, again, by the company's own confirmation. Keeping messages private is Facebook's priority, the company said in 2018, except for when it isn't, which is all the time because their systems are always watching. So we have premise A, Zuck plays Simon Says with the FBI. That's demonstrated. We have premise B, that even your supposedly private Facebook communication isn't private, they monitor it. That's demonstrated. You can arrive at conclusion C without ever even reading today's headline. Facebook monitors your private messages and sends the juicy parts over to the feds. That is exactly what is alleged by DOJ sources speaking with reporter Miranda Devine at the New York Post. Facebook spied on private messages of Americans who questioned the 2020 election, the headline reads, and not just monitored those messages, but flagged them and reported them to the FBI if they expressed anti-government or anti-authority sentiments. Making these accusations are several anonymous sources within the Justice Department. We don't know who these people are. We don't know what their roles are or how they even know this information, but this reporter Devine says they are brave and concerned.
There are some brave individuals who work within the DOJ and the FBI, and their consciences were troubling them. They felt that this was completely wrong and illegal.
I wish they were brave and concerned enough to put their names to it, but I get it. That's often easier said than done if they'll be put in legal jeopardy for outing the illegal actions of their bosses. So fair enough, I just want to offer the appropriate caution anytime a story is based entirely on anonymous sources say. Still, you don't have to rely exclusively on what they say in this case. You can put premises A and B together and arrive at that conclusion independently, and what this story says aligns exactly with that theory. According to these sources, this process was exactly the sort of privacy workaround that it sounds like, the government getting a hold of your private communications without the legal steps of getting a warrant or a subpoena, or at least before those legal steps were conducted, though apparently the system was designed to make it look like the necessary legal process was fulfilled. It was all done outside the legal process and without probable cause, said one of the sources. Facebook would send redacted portions of private message conversations to the FBI Domestic Terrorism Unit in D.C. Those messages were then farmed out as leads, as the reporter describes, forwarded to the relevant FBI field office, and if that office decided they were interested, they'd work with the local U.S. Attorney's Office to do the necessary legal paperwork to get the full conversation. And reportedly, Facebook's assistants didn't stop with just these leads. Facebook had the full conversations unredacted and ready to go, neatly packed up for the FBI, the second that the paperwork dropped. According to the sources, as soon as Facebook received a subpoena, they'd send back gigabytes of data and photos, often within the hour. Facebook had everything pre-packaged and needed the paperwork as only a formality to cover for the cooperation they had already been doing with the FBI anyway. And unsurprisingly, according to these sources, the targets of these investigations were all of a particular political persuasion. One of the sources says they were gun-toting, red-blooded Americans who were angry after the election and shooting off their mouths and talking about staging protests. It wasn't an abundance of caution about political violence in general that motivated this snooping either. Another source says none of the targets were Antifa types. And yet, none of this surveillance op produced any meaningful prosecutions or anything of consequence, really, other than a massive breach of privacy in the legal process, which is important on principle, of course. I just mean that apparently nobody got busted in this effort. One of the sources described it as a total waste of time, a 19-month frenzy at the FBI headquarters that was conducted to satisfy Biden's need for the largest volume of post-January 6th domestic terrorism cases possible, but nothing criminal ever turned up. No plans or plots to actually carry out any kind of violence. But that is another point that makes me at least a little skeptical of this story as told. Of course, I wouldn't be at all surprised to learn that the FBI didn't find anything criminal using these methods, but I would be very surprised to learn that they didn't at least try to manufacture that. To tell me that they had illegal access to private messages, but with all the vigor that they applied to the trespassing grandmas and to the Whitmer plot entrapment and to all the rest, that they couldn't make something useful out of that resource? I can believe in the deeper depths of FBI and social media corruption, and frankly, I do. That's exactly what makes me a little suspicious. You're telling me that the most corrupt people with the most corrupt resources couldn't produce any corrupt ends? Why not? And if you ask the corrupt spokespeople, they'll tell you it's simple. It's because it didn't happen. Facebook parent company spokeswoman Erica Sakin issued 2 statements, both denying the allegations and the story entirely. She said the claims are a false misunderstanding of how the company protects people from harm and engages with law enforcement. She says the company scrutinizes all law enforcement information requests carefully, making sure the requests are legal, and the company complies on narrowly tailored terms, often after pushback. In a second statement, she said there is zero evidence to support these claims, which, in fairness, is true. Beyond the anonymous allegations, we don't have any new substantiation for this story, only the previously demonstrated circumstances that create the opportunity for this sort of behavior, but no direct proof that this behavior actually happened. We just have to believe these anonymous accusers or believe Facebook. But the trouble is, I have absolutely no reason to believe Facebook either. In fact, I have good reason to doubt Facebook by default, because at some level, Facebook's denial is a piece of evidence to me. And of course, I don't mean that as a matter of general principle, that anyone's denial is evidence of their guilt. What I mean is that when Facebook specifically denies stuff, it often comes true. Facebook, of course, denied the truth of the Hunter Biden laptop story. Zuck then later acknowledged that it was true, creating that entire controversy. On privacy matters specifically, Facebook denied any wrongdoing in the Cambridge Analytica scandal, in which the private information of millions was improperly collected without consent. Facebook still denies any wrongdoing, despite recently settling a lawsuit and paying one of the largest corporate fines ever imposed by the FTC for privacy violations. And sure, federal penalty doesn't necessarily mean guilt. If I believe the feds are abusive, then they're just as capable of abusing Zuckerberg and Facebook as they are anybody else. But Zuck and company have made a habit of these privacy breaches and their denials elsewhere too. When Zuckerberg promised a new privacy-focused vision for the company in 2019, he touted WhatsApp, the company's encrypted messaging service acquired in 2014, as a model. The company said with the encryption, even Facebook itself couldn't read the messages, even if they wanted to, until investigation last year demonstrated that of course they do. In fact, they have over 1,000 contract workers examining millions of user messages constantly. But it's still private, supposedly, because they only do that if the other person that you're talking to reports it to them, they say. So it's bomb-proof private encryption, unless and until someone tattles, in which case all principles of privacy and security are gone. And in addition to that history, I'm not inclined to believe the Facebook messengers themselves either. It would be unconscionable for them to engage in politically motivated mistreatment, they say, as they openly advertise their political biases and hunting missions. Erica Sakin, the spokeswoman who issued the statement of denial, heads her Twitter account with anti-Trump New York Times headlines. She comes to speak for Facebook after a prior career doing the same for Planned Parenthood and the Obama campaign, when she's not tweeting about her worries about the gender and racial normative implications of her infant son's love of trucks. She's proudly advertising how good she is at censoring accounts with Proud Boy associations. And sure, she is just one, but she's far from the only. It is clear that the same persuasions occupy the higher levels of Facebook's communications department generally. On inquiry about this story, Facebook pointed the Daily Caller to the same statement also posted by Meta spokesman Andy Stone himself, proudly advertising that he comes to this job after handling similar responsibilities for a Democrat political action committee, and former Democratic Senator Barbara Boxer, and the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, and a Democratic congressman from California. So sure, perhaps the anonymous sources in this story are just lying as alleged, but I have every reason to believe that the people claiming that would lie too, not just because of their company's history with such convenient fibs, but because of their own proudly advertised party loyalties. Or maybe there is a way to reconcile all of it. Maybe you don't have to believe either the anonymous sources or Facebook. Maybe they're all telling the truth in something of a crafty way. That's what the story author Miranda Devine speculates, that perhaps Facebook just has one of the FBI's trademarked confidential human sources working within the company, someone with the authority to access and search users' private messages, but with the confidentiality protected by the FBI itself. That would create the circumstances for the searches and for the data transfer to happen, and the public plausible deniability for Facebook. Well, if a designated Fed at the office is all it takes for all the pieces of this story to come together, that's all the plausibility that I need. That's no leap at all. That's just the observation of a constant. Death, taxes, and the federal agent in charge of bringing you both. That is the trifecta of life's guarantees. And besides, at the Facebook office, it's not like this Fed would even have to hide himself. They have a very professional relationship, as Zuck himself describes. So I wouldn't be at all surprised to learn that their friendship is also very professionally concealed from the public. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Minds. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chatting my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it.